As always, it's a pleasure to be joined by Congressman Ro Khanna. Welcome back to Bad Faith.
Always great to be on.
Look, it's been a big week. Oftentimes you come on and I, along with a lot of progressives, complain about the fact that the Democratic Party seems not particularly interested in doing anything at all. And this week, some fraction of the demand to cancel student loan debt was actually delivered upon to I think a kind of a surprising amount of backlash, not from conservatives, that's not surprising at all, but from members of the Democratic Party. I watched recently Amy Klobuchar on a segment on Bill Maher the other night, saying that she wanted the program to be more targeted, apparently being, you know, the fact that the overwhelming majority of student loan debt cancellation goes to people making under $70,000 a year. Apparently that wasn't enough. The fact that it was capped at $125,000 wasn't enough.
There are other people in America, the vast majority of Americans didn't go to college, and they don't have college loans. So they're a little pissed about this. They're like, you know, there are plumbers out there saying, well, why don't you pay off my truck instead? Because that's what my money went to, my life went to. It's amazing to me when I read in the paper today how many Democrats are divided about this. They're not completely behind this idea that Joe Biden is paying off people's student loans. So where are you on that one?
I think, you know, during the presidential, I was the one that said rich kids, we shouldn't be paying for their college. You just can't staple a diploma for free under everyone's chair. Part of that is I think we need to focus on apprenticeships and filling the hard-to-fill jobs. If I could wave a magic wand and do what I want to do, I would have actually tied it to the hard-to-fill jobs. We have 10 million job openings right now in our country. 2 million of them are in healthcare, assisted living. So if people will go into those jobs instead of being like hedge fund managers, then we could actually put the loan repayment help and have it connected to people going into the jobs that we need to fill.
There's very little mention made of the fact that Biden's original promise was to cancel all debt for HBCU graduates and graduates of public colleges and universities. And I saw you fielding some of the pushback from so-called liberal media establishment figures on MSNBC and CNN. And I wonder what you make of the Democratic Party's efforts to push back against some of the negative backlash from its own alleged allies.
We need to get more of the facts out there. And the reality is you don't take out student loans if you're rich. The vast majority of people taking out student loans are going to public colleges. Many of them are first generation in their families to go to college. They're come from often working class families. It's a huge issue on wealth generation. People often say, well, okay, maybe they'll become a doctor. But the reality is many of these people come from families that have zero wealth or negative wealth. So if we want them to be able to buy a house or eventually tackle the 10-to-1 racial wealth disparity, we have to tackle this debt. You start out so much in the hole. And no other country does it. No other country has someone go into $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of debt. So as you said, it's a start. It's a down payment. It's not enough because you and I know it costs far more these days to go to college than just $10,000 or $20,000 for the Pell Grants. But I'm glad that we at least have started.
Here's what's so frustrating to me. When leftists, and you have been among the ranks of us who have gotten these kinds of criticisms, when leftists push for the Democratic Party to do more and critique the administration, we're called everything but the child of God. We're Putin's puppets. We are, you know, we hate democracy. We're Trump lovers. We're everything in the world. Now you have, you know, centrist Democratic figures like Tim Ryan, like Amy Klobuchar, taking pot shots at perhaps one of the most successful moments in Biden's entire administration, one that has caused his favorability among young voters to spike and to bring him to a place, favorability rating that is better than he has seen perhaps since the beginning of his presidency. And yet they're not getting the same kind of pushback. And I'm curious what you make of that, because a lot of the left is sitting here thinking, as long as those figures are able to undermine the even little bit of good that a little bit of progressive policy the Democrats are able to put forward, they are in many ways the white moderate, the obstacle that Martin Luther King warned of to real progress, because we expect a certain amount from Republicans. Republicans are 50%. If we can't get our own 50% on board, what's there to be done about it? And are progressives going to start calling out members of their own caucus who are not falling in line with this aspect of the president's agenda?
Well, I think that the progressives have actually been more supportive of the president's agenda from day one. I mean, you look at Build Back Better, which had childcare and universal preschool. It was the progressives who were championing it. And as you know, it was a lot of the centrists in the Senate that killed some of the original social programs. So the progressives, we are aspirational. We want more than the president did. But by and large, when the president takes strong action in a positive direction, we're on defending the president. I was out there defending the president on the withdrawal of Afghanistan. I've been out there defending the president on social spending. So my view is, though, that the way to be constructive is to get more progressives elected and to continue to be bold in the case of why this is actually good in places like Pennsylvania and places like Ohio. I think it's winning politics. So I guess if people ask me what I think of their positions, I'd say I don't think that that's good politics, even in the Midwest.
Representative Khanna, I have made it clear what my position is on kind of putting our future in the hands of getting more progressives elected. And so I won't hash through it in any detail. Listeners to this show know that I'm very skeptical of what will come of more progressives being elected when we've had progressives in sufficient number to obstruct policy and be the mansions or cinemas of the House. And Bernie and Warren, whoever you consider to be progressive in the Senate, similarly has always had the ability, because of the slim margins in both chambers, to be as big of a thorn in the heel of Biden's ability to pass legislation as any of the people on the right, and they have neglected to do so. Barack Obama had a supermajority, and still we got the exact same kind of excuses that we're getting today. But that aside, even if that were your personal project, it's curious to me how you can make the case for progressives and why Democrats more broadly should want to elect more progressive members when there is a reluctance to call out centrist members of the House as being as antagonistic to the interests of working people as I would argue people like Tim Ryan are right now. So I'll ask you, do you think Tim Ryan is wrong to be coming out against student debt cancellation right now?
I disagree with his position, but when you look at where Democrats are, like Tim Ryan, who's obviously a campaign I support for the Senate, he has been there for the climate investments. He has been there for the child tax credit. He's been there for the CHIPS Act, which is going to bring a lot of manufacturing back. So I guess my point is this, that there is a huge difference between where President Biden is and what we've passed and where someone like J.D. Vance or the Republicans who these folks are running against will be. And progressives have gotten huge wins. I mean, do you think we would have gotten a $300 billion of climate investment if it weren't for Bernie Sanders' campaign, if it weren't for the Sunrise Movement, if it weren't for progressives insisting that climate was the highest priority in the House? Do you think we would have gotten student loan forgiveness if President Biden didn't face that primary, if we didn't have people like Senator Warren, myself, Pramila Jayapal, and others for 2 years showing up at protests, pushing this? So I do think that the progressives can claim ownership of some of the key progressive pieces of the president's agenda.
I guess I would give more ownership and give more credit to the activists who have been working outside of politics, people like Strike Debt, Asher Taylor's organization, activists who have not only pushed Biden's agenda, but who helped to create and design Bernie's agenda in the first instance. I don't know that I necessarily would even frame the question that way, because at the end of the day, so many climate activists, the ones that you reference, are so frustrated precisely because Biden can simultaneously herald this as the largest investment in climate ever at the same time that it woefully fails to meet the moment if you actually cared about meeting some of the climate goals that are going to prevent some downstream effects that are going to result in millions of lives lost and kind of unfathomable harm to the planet and the people living on it. So it's difficult for me to hold those things in my mind at the same time, especially because we're jumping to the end game here. Tim Ryan is only in the position that he's in where he has to be J.D. Vance, because I would argue there's not enough due attention paid to candidates like Morgan Harper. And people don't understand the difference between a Tim Ryan and a Morgan Harper, who is the progressive running in that race. If I think in this moment, people like yourselves who are styled as progressives aren't demonstrating to the broader public the consequences of choosing, say, an Amy Klobuchar type over you, or Tim Ryan over a Morgan Harper. And you can't just make that argument, I would argue, in the context of a campaign cycle. Oh, by the way, here's what it means to be a progressive, because I'm sure you remember 2020, almost everyone started to style themselves as a progressive and talk about some version of Medicare for all who wanted. And okay, I'm not going to do full cancellation, but I'll do 10,000, I'll do 50,000. Kamala Harris had this plan where if you jumped on one foot and hula hooped for a certain period of time in a low income district, you could get student debt cancellation. Like, this is what people do. So if you're not willing, and I mean this really in good faith, if you're not willing in these kinds of moments to call out members of your own party, when centrists have no issues calling out progressives who they feel like they don't fall in line, how can you hope to make the case when the time comes that people should root for the progressive at the ballot box and not the Tim Ryan, Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden style candidate when there's progressives at play?
Well, I think people know who progressives are in terms of their policies. I mean, I'm on Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. I think that's the right bill. I don't think you have 15 different versions of it. I'm for free public college. I'm for the Strong PRO Act. I was championing the Thrive Act, which is actually calls for $1 trillion investment every year over 10 years. To put that in context, this is $300 billion. That is $10 trillion. So I agree with you that we need far more investment in solar and wind and batteries and electric vehicles and charging stations. The difference, I think, is that I have tried, while being totally committed to the policies, not offering Medicare version part 2 or Medicare if you want it, being totally true to the progressive agenda, have tried to work within the Congress to get 51 senators and to get 218 members of Congress. And I was public. I was working with Senator Manchin to try to get on 300 plus billion of and I guess my view is that you need some progressives who are going to be those calling folks out, but you also need progressives who, while being true to their ideals, are going to build the coalition to move the agenda. And it's a matter of temperament. And I see myself as one part of as a coalition builder, while not compromising my views, figuring out how do we get other members on board with it. If I start attacking those members and calling into question their sincerity, I'm never going to get people to get to the 218 or the 51 senators.
Is it attacking someone like Tim Ryan to point out all the ways that he's wrong about how he's characterizing student debt cancellation?
No, I disagree with him on that. And if they played a clip of his, I would say, no, I disagree. I think student debt cancellation is going to help precisely the folks in Youngstown that Tim's most concerned about.
In 2018, you tweeted, quote, student debt is out of control. If we can bail out the banks who did everything wrong, we can help out the students who did everything right. Isn't that what President Biden's policy is trying to do?
Again, I mean, we're not saying that there's not a significant burden here. The cost of college is outrageous, but there's nothing in here to control that cost. And again, I think we can get a significant way down the road by allowing them to renegotiate down the interest rates and put some money into their pocket. And again, there's a lot of other people out here that are doing everything right as well. So if it's part of a broader package, we could certainly talk about it. That's why I think a tax cut for all working people, or medical debt, which isn't directly linked to somebody who goes to college. I mean, I think we've got to have a broader package here, and I would certainly support something like that. But I think the general tax cut's the best way to go.
A lot of times people have this image of, which is incorrect, of some, professional family and their kids getting these student loans to go to Ivy League schools. First of all, 99% of people who get student loans don't take them to go to Ivy League schools. Many are first in their generation to go to family. I've been to union halls where they're having fundraisers for their kids to be able to go to college. And so what I would say is I disagree with that position, but that doesn't mean that we have to attack people or not support them in his current race in Ohio. It'd be a big deal if he were the senator and we could pass more of the agenda.
I mean, Representative, that feels a little bit like moving the goalpost. Again, no one's suggesting an attack. I feel like oftentimes when leftists call for accountability, when leftists call for politicians to draw a contrast between their positions and the positions of centrist Democrats, who often, if not always, work overtime to undermine the interests of working people in this country and have done so for many decades. It's very frustrating to be told on one hand, I'm not going to draw a simple contrast between what it means to have a real progressive and a fake progressive or a centrist Democrat or a neoliberal. And also be told, well, we need to elect more of you to office. Because you're saying some other people somewhere are going to be the attack dogs or who are going to be on the more offensive, who are going to call people out. I'm not seeing anyone anywhere. And I want to make this point specifically clear. You were the co-chair of the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. You are well aware of the fact that Bernie Sanders has had as part of his agenda a comprehensive plan to reform the education system that included not just full student debt cancellation, but a plan to promote free public colleges funded by a small tax on Wall Street transactions.
I'm co-sponsoring that bill. I was an original co-sponsor of it.
So let's talk about this. On top of the fact that there have been a lot of calls for medical debt cancellation, which Bernie Sanders was the only candidate in 2020 who had a plan for medical debt cancellation as well. And what I've observed is a lot of bad faith actors, including those in the Democratic Party, are using the following rhetorical sleight of hand. They say, oh, why can't we do all these other things? There are more meritorious types of debtors. There are poorer people than people who are college graduates or who have taken out college loans, because, of course, something like 40% of people with student debt don't actually have a degree. The response I would like to see to that from progressives is that you had no interest in those policies when they were part of Bernie's platform. At no point in your whole tenure in Congress have you ever backed or supported these policies. But here is legislation that has been put forward that I champion you signing on to and pushing Joe Biden to champion as well. And really making it clear that the reason that Biden has canceled student debt right now is because it's one of the few ways that he can help middle-class people and working class people without the consent of an intransigent Congress. And if people want more, then they should talk to their congressional representatives, not be mad at Biden or progressives who have been pushing these policies. What do you make of that?
I actually agree with that argument. I mean, I think the folks are saying that we can do more for working class Americans and that student debt helps some working class, but also helps the middle class. Well, let's have them sign on to what Bernie Sanders and I are doing in terms of calling for the cancellation of medical debt, $290 billion of medical debt that falls largely on working class families. Let's have them come out for an interest cap of 15% on credit card debt. I mean, that's what's really fleecing the working class. So if you want to say, okay, the student loan debt policy, it helps some working class folks, it helps middle class folks. We want to have more policies targeted just at the working class. I'm happy to work with you on policies on capping interest rates for credit cards. I'm happy to work with you on canceling medical debt. I'm happy to work with you to make sure that we're not subsidizing Wall Street to go buy up single family housing units and jacking up the rent, and that we have some sense that rent can't increase beyond inflation, and that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae shouldn't be subsidizing those private equity firms, because that's actually hurting the working class. So actually, Briahna, I agree that we should point out what more we can do and support that.
What do you make of Biden's failure to follow through on his campaign promise to cancel all debt for HBCU graduates and for public school graduates?
Well, he should cancel it for HBCU graduates, partly because that's one of the biggest immediate steps we can take on the racial wealth gap. As you know, the HBCUs are so much less funded than many of the private institutions, and so it would help because they don't have the same endowments. And I think we should continue to push for that. But, I do want to give the president some credit in that he took the progressive side on this over people who were not pushing for this. And so, he does deserve credit, but this is only step one, and we have to continue to push.
Well, that's the question. People are very curious about whether or not this is something that's coming out before midterms to gin up excitement about Joe Biden, and whether it, one, is going to face a constitutional challenge that it's not going to be to overcome, and two, whether or not this is truly the first step or just a pacifying balm to put us all to sleep and prevent the full obligation that came with his campaign promises from being actually passed. So I'm curious whether you have any insights into the kind of conversations that have been happening on the Hill about how he landed at this $10,000 number, which, by the way, is the number that the student loan servicers were advocating for in their lobbying efforts. I would argue because they understand that it's just a tip of the iceberg and that their real interest is getting the moratorium ended so that they can continue to earn money and profit off of our loans by servicing those loans.
Well, I don't think that anyone is naive enough to think that this issue is going to go away and that a one-time forgiveness of just $10,000 is going to make the student debt problem disappear. I think the president has set a precedent that this is now allowed, and it's going to require other Democratic candidates and future presidents to also take action on it. And to the extent that it's political, if they're doing this because that's popular, I don't have a problem with whatever the motives are. I don't know what the motives are, but if people want to get Medicare for all and free public college and student debt relief because they think those are winning issues, frankly, that's what the progressives have been saying, that a lot of these issues are popular. And I'm glad that the president's poll numbers are going up with him taking these actions. Hopefully, he'll see that there are other progressive policies that also will help him, help us win the midterms and help him get reelected.
Yeah, I think the issue isn't whether or not it's a bad thing for him to do something popular. I think we all agree that it's a good thing for him to do things that are popular. The concern is that he did a fraction of the popular thing that people are clamoring for, and whether or not we're being force-fed this idea that we should be grateful for the scraps that we've been given when it is fully within his power authority, and frankly, something that he promised to do more. And I would just reference back to early in this conversation when you made a similar argument to me about these climate efforts, where because it's the most significant investment in the history of mankind, where progressives are basically being told we should be celebrating this, when I think anybody whose eyes are open realize that the stakes are so much higher than a political win, and that framing it in those kinds of terms at all is a little bit gross to the ear. Now, student debt cancellation is not the same existential crisis at a global scale that the climate crisis is, but we do have clearer commitments from Joe Biden about what he was willing to do. And it does smell funny when he has fully, on paper, on his website, you can still go and pull it up, made these promises to cancel the full debt of these specifically disenfranchised groups. He relies on Black voters in particular to get reelected. And that there's this weird bait and switch going on where it's almost impossible to get a conversation or a clear statement from the White House, Miguel Cardona, Secretary of Education, anybody about why this particular decision was made. Do you not have insight? Were you not privy to the conversations as one of the few progressives in the House about how this the decision to land on the $10,000 or $20,000 number?
No, I wasn't part of that. I mean, obviously, people like me and Senator Warren and Senator Sanders have been advocating for the more relief, the better. We were advocating for the full relief for HBCU graduates. We've been advocating for that. I took to the Washington Post op-eds. I stood out multiple rallies outside the White House, as have other progressives. So I think that all helped build momentum. But Brie, one of the points I want to make because of climate, Sunrise came out for the deal. Bill McKibben came out for this. And the reason I want to point that out is that so many progressives feel like their voice doesn't matter, their activism doesn't matter. There's a disillusionment. And I don't want them to feel that way, because if it weren't for Bernie Sanders' campaign, if it weren't for the Sunrise Movement, if it weren't for their sit-in at Pelosi's office, if it wasn't for Bill McKibben's lifetime work and 350 Org and NRDC and Food and Water Watch, we would not have had a $300 billion climate investment in a Joe Biden presidency. And the reason that's so important is I want people to continue to push and be active. They can criticize me. That's why I come on the program, because I think it's important to hear criticism. But the main thing I don't want people to do is disengage.
Well, I don't think that people become disaffected or disillusioned because there isn't sufficient credit given to incremental change that happens. I think people become disillusioned when they're told to swallow incremental change as the full extent of what their activism can reach, instead of achieving something incremental, as we have done in the context of this student debt fight, and then continuing to push for the whole hog instead of being pacified by crumbs being thrown their way. And again, Representative, this is a frustrating trend that I've encountered in doing these kinds of interviews, where any demand for accountability and any demand for doing more is framed as, well, you're causing people to be disaffected. Even Bernie Sanders said to me after the election, or not to me, but to the press about me when the election, when the campaign wrapped in 2020, someone asked him about the fact that I had tweeted that I was not going to knee-jerk support Joe Biden if he didn't make various commitments to follow through on campaign promises and meet the moment in the middle of COVID. And Bernie said something along the lines of, it's irresponsible to check out. It's irresponsible to check out the election. Demanding more from people is the opposite of checking out. Demanding more from the president of the United States, who in fact promised more, is the opposite of causing people to be disillusioned.
I think the responsibility is with people who are elected leaders to inspire folks to get them engaged. So I don't criticize anyone for criticizing me. I don't expect anyone to support me or support progressives or support the Democratic Party. I'm just saying that I believe that progressives have had many key wins, and it's for us to convince them that they should continue to mobilize. I mean, you invoked Dr. King, and you know the civil rights history very well. And, the 1957 Civil Rights Act that was initially proposed by Johnson in the Senate was a very watered down version. It took many iterations of that. And so I would say that progressives, what I don't appreciate right now is that the progressives aren't getting enough credit, frankly, not progressives in the House, the progressive activists, for the agenda that has gotten passed. Let's be very clear. A Joe Biden presidency without Bernie Sanders running, without Elizabeth Warren running, without the progressive movement would have looked very, very different. And so I want to make sure that progressives know the impact they're having and get more active. That doesn't mean that if someone is saying, I don't want to, that, I'm going to lecture them. I'm going to try to inspire them to get involved.
So I agree with you, Representative, but that is exactly the point I'm trying to make about the rhetorical posture that people could be taking, allies of this legislation or allies of this executive action could be taking when they go on TV. Progressives get credit when you claim credit for yourself and you say, I told you so. This is what we've been advocating for. We're the ones who were supporting candidates like Bernie Sanders, who did the thing that you're now complaining about and had a holistic approach to this that would actually resolve the underlying issue. If you care so much about the underlying issue, why didn't you support us when we were advocating for free public colleges for all? Why weren't you supporting us when we were advocating for medical debt cancellation? Even Elizabeth Warren didn't support medical debt cancellation in the context of the 2020 race. Those are the kind of call outs that I think and the distinctions made on TV that would make the work of progressives who have been fighting so hard a lot easier. Because otherwise, anybody else who's listening, I'm sorry, the reality is people think that there is no difference between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and they certainly don't think that there's any, and even more tragically, don't think there's any difference between someone like Amy Klobuchar or Tim Ryan and the rest of the Democratic Party, because we live in a vote blue no matter who world.
Here's my view. I think we as progressives need to take credit for the victories. We need to make sure that we are electing people without obfuscating the issues. And we should push back against people who try to blame progressives when they speak out. So I guess my view of it is this. I'm a free speech person. If centrists can criticize the president when they disagree with him, then we should extend the same courtesy to people who are criticizing the president from the left. That's my philosophy. When you're in politics, you should be open to criticism. And I guess I never have understood this view that once you're in Congress or once we have a president of our own party, we all have to salute and stop any criticism. I don't think that's a healthy democracy.
Let me ask you briefly about the recent elections in New York, including New York's 10th district. There was a lot of brouhaha about the fact that redistricting earlier in the year led to a situation where longtime incumbents were facing off against each other, and Kelly Maloney and Jerry Nadler. And also you had a situation where there were multiple progressives, Yuh-Line Niou and Mondaire Jones, against each other in New York's 10th district. Kelly Maloney obviously lost that race. She was head of the House Oversight Committee, where you also serve. I wonder what you make of this situation, how it came to be in the first place with the Democrats pushing for redistricting in New York, hoping that it would be advantageous to Democrats being able to get more seats in the state. and then having this particularly bizarre sort of an outcome?
Well, my understanding is it went to some special master who drew these districts, and no one was happy with the districts. But I definitely think it was unfortunate. I mean, it was unfortunate. I had tweeted out that Mondaire Jones should run in the seat. He shouldn't have deferred to Sean Patrick Maloney when that happened, and I said I would support him in that seat. So it's unfortunate the way it played out, and we've lost some good progressive voices because of that.
And what do you think about Yuh-Line running on the Working Families Party line in the general election despite losing the primary?
Has she decided to do that? I have not.
I think it's still speculative at the time of recording.
You know, I obviously I'm a Democrat. I will support people who are progressive Democrats, and I think maybe she can run 2 years from now. But it's a free country, and I have never said that third parties should not be allowed, or that they should somehow be shamed. It's a democracy, and so she's going to have to make the decision of what's best for her in her race.
Well, speaking of third parties, the last thing I wanted to ask you about was Andrew Yang and this Forward Party effort. You've been making the rounds, spending a lot of time in the Midwest, making the case for economic populism, talking about a lot of themes that, of course, Andrew Yang also hit during his presidential run about bringing manufacturing home. These were also themes that were very popular among Trump voters and Bernie voters, something that was sometimes described not so flatteringly, but which I think is a true thing, that there are a lot of folks, especially in the center of the country, who felt really hurt personally, financially, by the trade decisions to move jobs overseas in the last 20 years, and that there's an appetite for politicians on whatever side of the aisle who will recognize that failure and who will speak to the growth of automation and other kinds of economic shifts that are going to continue to disadvantage the Rust Belt, let's say. How do you distinguish yourself from someone like Andrew Yang, who seems to be in many ways making the same sort of play that you're making for potentially for some longer term political ambitions?
Well, look, I like Andrew, but I think he has a very different vision. The problem in this country is that there was the hollowing out of the middle class and the working class. We've lost almost 25% of wealth of the working and middle class since 1980. It was a total mistake to allow production to go offshore. And we have to be clear, as Senator Sanders was, there should be a tax on offshoring jobs because it's destroying communities. In fact, President Biden ran on it. It hasn't become law yet. But if you're going to ship jobs offshore, that should be taxed. We need to have fair trade perspective so that you can't just have dumping into the United States. But the most important thing, and here's where I differ from Andrew, is we need to rebuild, reindustrialize America. That means having federal investment with business to create good union jobs, and to let's build electric vehicles, let's build semiconductors, let's build the next hydrogen jets. That's not a vision of saying let's just tax people and give people a check. It's saying let's actually have the government engaged in partnership in building this country. It's a shame, in my view, that Donald Trump has somehow taken this Make America theme. It was an FDR theme. FDR really built our productive capacity. So I would argue that, I probably have more in common with Senator Sanders or FDR ideologically than Andrew, who has a little bit more libertarian instincts.
Is that to say that you don't support a kind of a universal basic income?
I would support I don't support it in the form he has, because that would be $4 trillion. And I rather have that invested in free college and invested in creating new manufacturing jobs. But what I have supported is what I call a UBI to Rise, which says if you're in transition in a particular job or between college or between high school, we should give you some resources to be able to do that. But that's a difference in our approach.
And about the Forward Party specifically, would you ever see yourself running on, if not a Forward Party ticket, some other third party effort, given what we've seen about how the Democratic Party is often extremely antagonistic to progressives who attempt to run like Bernie Sanders did, like India Walton did, like Nina Turner did?
No, Brie, I've been a Democrat since I was 18 years old. I mean, I interned for the Carter Center. I interned at the White House. I worked for President Obama. I've been a proud Democrat, and I supported Senator Sanders twice, chaired his campaign. But here's what we forget. he almost won. I mean, I thought after Nevada he was going to win the nomination. So this idea that progressives aren't going to have a place in the Democratic Party, I think, is wrong. In fact, my view is post President Biden, we're going to have 20 years of progressive nominees and progressive leaders, and that the progressive wing is ascendant. And that's because of the hard work that people like you and others and Senator Sanders did. I think he's changed the face of the electoral landscape for the Democratic Party.
Representative Khanna, Bernie almost won. What, in your eyes, was the but-for cause of his not winning?
Well, I'm not a political pundit. I'll tell you, though, a couple of things. I think that
You're the co-chair of his campaign, though, Representative. You have some insights into this, right? You have some opinion.
I think we have to do a better job in building in the Black South. I was talking to Jonathan Jackson, who I supported for Congress, who's going to be a great member of Congress. He was the son of Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson won South Carolina twice and actually did really well in the Black South. So I think our message on Medicare for all and free public college can connect in the Black South, but we need to do more organic organizing in those communities. And that was a weakness. And then second, I think we did not have enough infrastructure in the Democratic Party, but now that's changing. You have the chair of Nevada State Party, someone who had supported Bernie Sanders. You've had people in West Virginia from Bernie Sanders getting involved in the party, in California. So you see that the infrastructure of the party is also slowly changing, and that will make it easier.
But Bernie won Nevada. That wasn't the issue. The issue, in my eyes and in many people's telling, is the fact of Barack Obama picking up the phone and getting the moderates, the centrists, people who are now opening their mouths to criticize the student debt cancellation like Amy Klobuchar, getting them all to drop out of the race and to get a mass consolidation behind Joe Biden, which didn't exist to that time. He had lost the first 4 primaries and badly. And it wasn't until South Carolina, to your point, at the Black South, 60% of voters in that primary said that Jim Clyburn's endorsement was determinative in who they voted for. So there's a certain extent to which, organizing, which absolutely needs to be done regardless, isn't necessarily well calibrated to have a different result there. And when you look at someone like Jim Clyburn, when you look at his district, which I believe is number 2 for medical debt in the entire United States of America, and he is someone who has taken more money from the pharmaceutical industry than any other person in Congress. And you start to put the pieces together, it's structural issues like that, the influence of money in politics, the fact that so many Democrats we feel are paid to not support the policies and the progressives that would best benefit their constituents. That's what gives people pessimism about the efforts to work within the Democratic Party. And I wonder what you make of that as a diagnosis.
Well, is there too much money in American politics? Obviously, yes. Does that corrupt the process in Congress? Yes. Does that distort the nomination process? Yes. But what Bernie Sanders showed is that it's overcomable. I mean, he won state after state, both in 2016 and in 2020, with almost no elected officials endorsing him. John Fetterman did that in Pennsylvania. I was struck that, all the traditional endorsements in Pennsylvania were with his opponent, and he won the primary pretty easily. So I think politics is changing. The value of endorsements, that yes, they matter. They can matter in context, but I think they matter less than being able to organize on the ground and digitally. And I think it's doable. Is it going to be easy? No. But, to quote The Godfather, difficult but not impossible.
Well, look, I think the Fetterman example is a good one because Fetterman, for whatever, rightly or wrongly, whatever you think of it, has been making very strong contrast between himself and what he stands for and Dr. Oz. Whether it's with these viral tweets and the crudité and all of it, there's no confusion about not just who John Fetterman is, but how he differs and is willing to go on the offensive against Dr. Oz. I'm afraid I don't see that when we're talking about people like Jim Clyburn, who have an enormous amount of control over who gets elected president, at least for now. And I would love to see, and I wonder if you can answer whether we will see progressives in the House championing not only the bill we talked about earlier and that you are an early signatory to make public colleges and universities tuition free, but also Bernie's plan to cancel all medical debt, since those two issues are being heralded as why people don't support the debt cancellation that's already come down?
Well, maybe Bernie Sanders or others will watch this program, because I had activists come meet with me, and I promised them that I wanted to introduce a medical debt cancellation. We have done all of the research. I'm happy to introduce that myself, but I think it would be more fitting to introduce it with Senator Sanders, since it was originally his idea on the trail. And we've reached out to his office. They've been obviously responsive, but I'd love to do it with him. If not, I'm happy to introduce it. But I think we should be getting rid of medical debt. I mean, that is, in fact, I made the point, I was just on Fox News in between, and I made the point that, fine, want to help working families even more? Why don't we start by eliminating medical debt? The two things that will really help is medical debt and credit card debt. I mean, you take those two actions, and that's targeted to the working class. So I think that is a very good frame about the student loan point, which is, okay, you don't think it helps working class folks enough? Well, let's do more. We're open to that.
Yes. I'm not trying to be anybody's comms director from the podcast podium, but to the extent I have any influence at all, I really do think that's a strong messaging point to push on. Just like, I was making this argument about the defund the FBI movement that I think a lot of folks think was made in bad faith from people like Candace Owens and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But at the end of the day, if progressives have their own agenda for substantive FBI reform because of the overreaches that institution has had, attacking left groups historically, civil rights groups, et cetera, then this is a time to go ahead and put your version of it forward and call people on their bluff. So whether it's putting forward a progressive reform of the FBI that would also be able to hold Trump accountable to the extent that he's broken the law, or an actual reform of public education or reform of medical debt relief, all of those kinds of things, I think calling folks on their bluff is the best way to really go about doing it. But look, I really appreciate how generous you've been with your time today, Representative Khanna.
Always great being on. Look forward to being back.
Same here. And to all of our listeners, take care and keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.